Ted Lasso might not be right about everything, but I think he is right about the fact that people and our pain are really complicated. Welcome back to the 50/50 Project, where every week I talk through an item on a list made up of one thing I've learned for each year I've lived. This week we are somehow already almost to the very end of this project with thing number 49. Both things can be true. A few episodes back, when I started this 5 episode final run through what I've learned from grief and loss, I talked a little bit about Philip Larkin's poem and its famous final lines that say, "What will survive of us is love." And I said that my own experiences lead me to believe that in the best of circumstances, this can be true, that we can be distilled down to a basic good. At least in a good relationship, we can get to a point where what we remember of someone who is gone is the best of what they've left behind. And I also said that this gives me some courage in my own relationships in the here and now, because I know I don't have to be perfect to leave a net positive legacy with someone. But I think maybe that's been a later stage of development for me, and one that I found only with time, and one that I found only through a process of turning my relationships and experiences over and really looking at both sides of them. And I don't know if I would have come to any kind of peace or any semblance of a settled narrative of what I know about the people I've lost and what I've learned from those experiences if I hadn't had the time and the space and the freedom really to wait around in both the good and the bad and the blessings and the wounds to get there. I'm grateful that I have had that latitude to come to terms with the fact that both things, that many, many things, can be true at the same time, even if they seem to conflict or to clash. Let me try to clarify what I mean with a pop culture reference. So there's this episode from the 3rd season of Ted Lasso. And by the way, I just saw that we're getting season 4 of Ted Lasso, and I could not be happier about that. But anyway, 3rd season of Ted Lasso, an episode focuses on Ted's complicated relationship with his mother. We learn that Ted has felt responsible for his mom since his early teens when his father died by suicide. He's always felt intense, crushing pressure to follow his mom's lead and put on a sunny, untroubled facade, to forget about, or at least not talk about what had happened, and to reinforce her pretense that everything was fine and nothing had changed. This meant that his own pain was never acknowledged and his own grief was never dealt with. And in this episode, his mom just sort of shows up for a surprise visit, and Ted goes into autopilot and plays the doting, dutiful son for as long as he can, until the tension that has percolated in their relationship for years just blows up. And there's this scene that punched me in the gut as hard as anything I've ever seen on television, where Ted just lays it all out. How sad he felt, how much he struggled to match her Pollyanna energy all these years, how alone he was left in his grief, how abandoned he felt as a kid trying to make sense of this terrible tragedy without any help from the adults in his life, and how that changed who he was meant to be. The script really pours out Ted's pain for all of us to see and empathize with. But here's the interesting thing. That same script invites us to also see things from his mom's perspective simultaneously. She starts out kind of defensive, surprised that Ted is, at long last, saying all this stuff he's never said before. But before long, she becomes contrite and apologetic, and eventually seems pretty heartsick about how she's compounded her son's sadness and intensified its lifelong effects. She didn't know what to do, she explains. So she tried to make things as normal as she could, both for him and for her. And the episode really invites you to believe them both. It doesn't ask you to pick a liar and a truth teller or a victim and a villain. I think we're supposed to ache for Ted's repressed sadness and the toll it has taken, But I think we're also supposed to believe her, to believe that she was lost and shaken in an unthinkable circumstance, and that she did the best thing she could to make the most sense of it at the time. And so watching this, I was really caught between the two of them with my sympathies, and it made sense to me to see Ted wheeling between empathy for her and rage on his own behalf. He actually delivers this really intense monologue to her. And forgive me for the swearing, but it's in the script. He says, "Thank you for flying all the way here to come and see me. And fuck you for not telling me you were coming. Thank you for all the small, silly things you did for me as a kid, like hiding notes in my lunchbox or putting googly eyes on the fruit at the supermarket just to make me laugh. And fuck you for not working on yourself or seeking help after we lost Dad, and for not talking to me about it either, just glossing over the whole thing and acting like everything was all right." And this thank you, F you, yo yoing is kind of shocking, really, given the arc of this character. And actually, I think anybody saying F you to their mother is pretty stunning in most circumstances, but especially Ted Lasso. I mean, really. In the end, though, Ted and his mother come through their fight better for it. They understand each other better. They each feel more seen and heard. They have this chance to hash this thing out in a way that I don't think very many of us actually get in real life. And I felt this scene really acutely because I've kind of lived it. As I have mentioned several times now, my mother died very suddenly when I was 11, and my father's reaction to her death and to his new responsibilities to suddenly being the sole caregiver to an adolescent daughter were actually pretty heroic. He retired early and left a team of colleagues he liked and a job that made him feel competent to step into a stay at home role in a sad and quiet house and into a job where he was a complete novice. And as an adult looking back now, I realize how hard that must have been for him, how lonely, how much it must have compounded his own feelings of lostness and grief. But he did what he thought was best for me in spite of all that. But like Ted's mom, his reaction was to grab hard onto business as usual. When my mom died, I didn't miss a single day of school. I came home from school at dismissal time the day she died, which happened to be the last day before Thanksgiving break. And when school reopened after 3 days off for the holiday, which our family spent on the funeral, I went right back, right on time. I was brought along with my family to make her arrangements at the mortuary because he felt like it was really important for me to have that closure. And I think that was ahead of his time in a way. But on the other hand, we never talked about her death after the day we actually buried her. And in fact, I don't recall having a single conversation about my mother's death or its impact on me after the day of her funeral with any adult until I was myself an adult. Because the plan was to normalize things, and principally for my own benefit, as soon as possible. It was done that way with the best possible intentions. And it was also absolutely batshit crazy. The way my family handled things was meant to give me a stable environment and to help me get back to normal. And it also destroyed whole parts of who I was meant to be in this world. For many years, I suppressed half of these truths that I've just told you. I think if you had asked me when I was 20 about my mom's death and how we handled it, I would have minimized it and focused on the shiny side of the coin. I might have said it was sad, very sad, but that it had happened a long time ago and life had gone on. I would have given you the answer that I had seen modeled. But now I would tell you that it's probably the single most defining experience of my life, and that the way we handled it or avoided handling it has touched every aspect of my life and continues to do so even now, almost 40 years later. If you'd have asked me about my dad and the way he got us through the dark days after her death, I would have focused on his early retirement or the way he cooked dinner every night, or the way he sent me off to college and made sure I had every material thing that I needed to survive. I would have glossed over the fact that, just like Ted, I was left alone in my grief to hold up a facade that we were moving on and doing just fine, and that this pressure reshaped everything about me. I can do that now. I can acknowledge both sides now after all these years. And I think it's incredibly transformative in a positive way to get to a place where you can acknowledge that both things can be true. It's life changing, life giving, maybe life saving to get to that point, to know that it isn't one or the other. It's not either that my dad did the absolute best he could do for me at every turn, and sometimes at tremendous cost to his own well being, or that my family's way of coping meant that I didn't get a lot of the support I really critically needed. Both things can be true. I don't need to make anybody else a villain when they weren't, or to pretend that I came out just fine when I didn't. The people around me did their best, and their best wasn't good enough. And both things can be true. My dad did everything he knew how to do for me, and I still didn't get what I needed. And both things can be true. I wish we could go back and do things so much differently. And I also would not trade my dad for anybody. Both things can be true. Both things are true. And this is probably the case with a lot of different kinds of experiences in life, but I think this has been a particularly important and tricky thing for me to learn about those I've loved and lost. We're told so often not to speak ill of the dead or to think ill of the dead or even to think critically about the dead. Our social conventions and our consciences sometimes lead us to present the dead as flawless or perfect or unimpeachable. And that can make it really hard to have honest, reliable conversations with others or even with ourselves about who these folks really were, what our relationships were really like, and how we've been loved and or hurt and or enriched or and wounded by them. And that can make it hard to heal or to grieve, to feel better in any real sense, or to move on at all. So that little gap, that extra space that opens up when I tell myself that it's not always a binary and that both things can be true, sometimes that can be enough space to just take a crucial step forward. Now, I do want to say that this isn't the case for everybody every time. For some folks, there simply is no other side of that coin. They've been hurt, and the people who hurt them suck. They've been wronged, and the people who wronged them aren't sorry and they meant to do it. Sometimes there's no thank you in the equation. There's only and always a fuck you. And I get that, and I'm not trying to overgeneralize. But I do think that for so many of us who've been through hard things, it's actually really complicated. And both sentiments can be said. Both things can be true. I don't know for sure when I learned this. I can't really trace it back to some light bulb moment, and I don't pretend that it's a lesson I've completely learned and have wrung into a skill that I always deploy, even now. But somewhere along the line, I did figure out that an acknowledgement of my own pain doesn't have to be an indictment of my people. And I don't have to pretend to be perfectly fine after everything I've been through to be genuinely and authentically grateful for everything I have been given. And I don't have to call into question the good intentions and the hard work and the genuine love of the people who raised me and helped me and supported me. To also know in my own heart that they didn't have all the tools that they needed, and I didn't get all of the interventions that I needed. There's a space for all of that. And it makes it more complicated, but it also feels like freedom to be who I really am now, to remember what really happened then. Okay, so that's it for now. I hope you feel free to be true to yourself and your experiences today. Thanks for spending some time with me. And I will be back next week with, at long last, already somehow, thing number 50.